Montana Territory, 1883. The wind was sharp that morning when Naomi Sutton stood on the edge of Dry Creek's only churchyard, her hands trembling as whispers followed her like shadows. She was called unfit to marry, hissed a voice behind her. Worse than unfit, someone else added. 2 children and no husband? That is not a woman fit for anything decent. Naomi heard them all, every word like a splinter under her skin. But she stood tall, dusty skirts brushing her boots, her dark hair pinned back tight. Her son, Daniel, clung to her side, only 6, with wide green eyes that had seen too much. Beside him stood Daisy, just 4, holding a worn rag doll tight to her chest. Neither child said a word. Naomi had buried her father that morning. He had been the last thread tying her to this town, the only man who had not looked at her with pity or judgment. Now she was alone with 2 children born out of wedlock and no one who dared offer her help. The father of her babies had left before Daisy was born. He had promised marriage, a home, but disappeared into the mountains, never to be seen again. As the crowd started to thin, Naomi kept her chin high, though her stomach ached with hunger and her hands shook for more than just cold. She needed work, shelter, food for her babies. But Dry Creek had already made up its mind about her. Naomi, came a voice, low and cautious. She turned. A tall man stood a few feet away. He wore a worn hat, the brim pulled low, and dust coated his boots like he had ridden hard. He had the look of a ranch hand's sunburned skin, strong shoulders, and eyes that held a calm steadiness. He looked about 30, maybe a little older. She did not know him. "I am Levi Ellard," he said gently, removing his hat. "I just came down from Red Horse Ridge. Drove cattle for the McAllisters up there." She said nothing, just blinked at him, her children staying close. "I heard what happened," he continued, "about your father. I am sorry. He was a kind man." Naomi nodded. "Thank you." He glanced at her children. "You have a place to stay?" She hesitated. "For now." Levi looked at the little boy, then the girl. "You do not, do you?" Naomi's lips pressed into a line. She hated pity. She hated how quickly people assumed she needed saving. But she was tired. So tired. "I built a cabin out near Willow Pass," Levi said. "It is small, but there is space. I do not have much, but I have extra flour and beans. A clean bed." He paused. "You and the children can stay if you want, just until you find your footing." Naomi stared at him. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said quietly. "I know what it is like not to be wanted." Her throat tightened. Daniel's hand found hers. "I would not ask anything from you," Levi added quickly. "No expectations. Just a place to rest." Naomi looked at her children. Daisy's cheeks were splotched red from the cold. Daniel's coat was too small. Her pride nearly made her refuse. Then she nodded. Levi's horse was tied near the fence. He helped her lift Daisy up first, holding her with surprising gentleness. Then Daniel. Naomi climbed up behind them. The ride out to Willow Pass was quiet. Wind swept through the pines, and snow clung to the higher ridges. The trees thinned near Levi's land, and there, tucked near a rock face, stood a small cabin with smoke curling from the chimney. Levi helped them down and opened the door. Inside it was simple. A wood stove, a cot, a table with 3 chairs, and a shelf with a few books and a Bible. A second room held a bed with a thick quilt. "You and the children take that room," Levi said. "I will bunk near the stove." Naomi stepped inside, her children close behind. The warmth hit her first, then the smell of stew. "You cooked?" she asked, surprised. "I am not great," he said, "but I manage." That night, after the children had eaten and fallen asleep in the back room, Naomi stepped out onto the porch. The stars were scattered across the sky like spilled sugar. Levi was chopping wood near the fence. "You did not have to do this," she said softly. He looked over at her. "I wanted to." She wrapped her arms around herself. "They all think I am ruined, that I am not fit to be anyone's wife. A burden. Shameful." Levi leaned on his axe. "People like to talk when they do not understand. But your children are fed. That makes you strong. You stayed when it would have been easier to run. That makes you braver than most. She looked down at her bare feet on the porch. You do not even know what I have done. I do not need to. I see who you are now. Naomi swallowed hard. Her heart ached in a way it had not in years, soft, cautious, but real. Levi stepped closer, but not too close. You do not have to prove yourself to anyone, Naomi. She looked up at him. Their eyes met in the silence. And for the first time in a long while, Naomi did not feel ashamed. She felt seen. The next morning, Daniel asked Levi if he could help feed the chickens. Daisy followed him around, clutching her doll and giggling when he made animal sounds. Naomi worked beside Levi in the kitchen, peeling potatoes and watching the way he moved, quiet, thoughtful, always gentle with her children. Days passed. Then a week. And it became clear they were not just surviving. They were healing. One evening, as snow fell soft outside the windows, Levi handed her a small wooden carving of a dove. I made it for Daisy, he said. She reminds me of peace. Naomi's fingers brushed as she took it. Something stirred in her chest. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just kindness but care. Patience. Hope. Thank you, she said, her voice catching. Levi's eyes lingered on hers. Naomi, I know I said I would not ask anything. And I will not. But if ever you want more someone to walk beside you, not carry you, I am here. She did not answer. Not yet. But her hand stayed in his a little longer than needed. And that small touch said more than words ever could. The wind had quieted and the sky hung low with heavy gray when Naomi patched the rip in Daniel's coat by the hearth. Levi had gone out to check the snares he'd set by the eastern ridge, his coat dusted with frost when he left just after dawn. The children napped curled together under the quilt in the back room, their small breaths steady as Naomi stitched, the needle tugging through worn cloth with a rhythm that calmed her nerves. By the third week, the cabin no longer felt like borrowed shelter. It felt like a place where days passed with purpose. Naomi rose early to bake cornbread or boil beans, and Levi never left without first asking if she needed anything carried or chopped. They spoke more in glances than words, but each shared task deepened the quiet understanding that had taken root between them. That afternoon, Levi returned with a hair slung over his shoulder and a gash on the side of his hand. Naomi stood from the table. What happened? Snare wire caught wrong, he said, brushing snow from his sleeves before stepping inside. She took his arm and led him to the table without asking. The cut wasn't deep, but blood had soaked into the cuff of his shirt. She fetched the small tin of carbolic salve from the shelf and poured a bit of clean water into a basin. You should have wrapped it sooner, she said, dabbing the wound with cloth. I figured you'd do a better job of it than I would. She glanced up. You could have at least tried. His eyes met hers. And missed the excuse to sit still while you fuss over me? She didn't smile, though the corners of her mouth twitched. You're lucky it's not worse. You're good with your hands, he said, watching as she bound the strip of linen around his palm. You ever learn from someone? Or just figured it yourself? My mother taught me before she passed, she murmured. She said a woman ought to know how to mend what breaks. Cloth, skin, heart. All the same, really. He let that settle. You ever think on leaving this place? She rinsed the cloth in the basin. I did once, after Daisy was born. But I didn't have coin, and I didn't want to end up in some boarding house where folks looked at the children like they were shame walking on two legs. Levi leaned back in the chair, his wrapped hand resting on his knee. There's a piece of land west of here, just past the old cottonwood grove. Belongs to no one far as I know. It's fertile. Enough for a garden, maybe a goat or two. Naomi folded the rag and set it aside. You've thought about building there? I've thought about building something. Not just for myself. She looked at him then, really looked. Are you saying you want us here for good? I'm saying, he said slowly, I'd like to build something that don't vanish come winter. Don't matter if it's a fence or a life. I'm tired of passing through. The fire crackled in the stove. Naomi reached for the kettle and poured 2 tin cups half full. She handed him one, her fingers brushing his again. I don't want to be someone's charity, she said, barely above a whisper. You're not. You're someone I'd want beside me because you don't flinch when things get hard. Because you see things clear. She sat down across from him, both hands around her cup. I'm not easy. I'm not looking for easy. That night, Naomi lay awake listening to the wind shift through the trees. She thought of her father's hands planting potatoes one spring, of Daniel's first steps on the porch, of Daisy's laugh echoing through the cottonwoods. She thought of Levi's voice, quiet but sure, and the way he looked at her like she wasn't broken, just weathered. In the days that followed, she helped him dig fence posts along the southern line. He didn't offer to take the shovel from her, he handed her one of her own. Daniel followed behind, gathering scrap wood for kindling, and Daisy sat in the grass weaving clover stems into loops. One afternoon, while hammering a post into the thawing ground, Levi paused and said, "You ever been asked proper?" She shielded her eyes from the sun. "For what?" "For your hand." The wind shifted. She answered, "Once. But it wasn't real. Just words to cover a swollen belly." He nodded. "Well, I ain't asking today. But when I do, it'll be with both feet planted and a roof over our heads we built together." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she bent, picked up the next post, and held it steady while he drove it into the earth. When the final stake was in, she dusted off her skirts. "I'd want it to be a home, not just a shelter." Levi looked at her, the sun catching in his hair. "Then we'll build it that way." And just like that, without need of vows or promises, something settled between them, a quiet agreement, forged not in haste, but in the slow, steady work of days shared and burdens halved. The thaw came slowly that spring, softening the frozen earth and loosening the hold winter had kept on the hills. Naomi stood by the edge of a new garden plot, sleeves rolled to her elbows, soil dark beneath her fingernails. Levi was down by the stream bank, clearing deadfall from the water's edge. Daniel chased a chicken around the yard, laughing breathless, while Daisy sat cross-legged in the dirt, arranging pebbles into neat circles. Naomi pressed her palm over the small of her back, sore from digging, then wiped her brow with the edge of her sleeve. She had not spent much of her life around men who listened more than they spoke, but Levi had never once told her to sit down when she wanted to stand. That mattered more than she could say. She straightened when she heard footsteps behind her. "You've got a good line to the sun here," said a woman's voice. Naomi turned. A stout woman in a faded calico dress stood a few paces away, holding the reins of a mule. Her face was tanned and lined, her hair tucked into a loose braid. A large woven basket hung from her elbow. "I'm Ida McKay," she said. "Live up past the ridge." Naomi nodded slowly. "I've heard the name." Ida offered a tired smile. "Levi's been trading eggs with my boy Caleb. Said you might want seed potatoes, for the frost's fully out." She held out the basket. Naomi hesitated, then took it carefully. "Thank you," she said. "I'll see they grow." Ida looked past her to where Daisy hummed to herself and Daniel wrestled a stick out of the chicken's path. "Those yours?" "They are." Ida squinted, then gave a slow nod. "They seem strong." Naomi didn't answer. "I raised 4, Ida said. 2 made it. The others? Well, the land takes what it wants sometimes." Naomi glanced down at the basket. "I've done what I could." Ida stepped closer. "Don't let folks in town shrink you. They don't know what it is to hold on with both hands when nothing's certain." Naomi lifted her chin. "I don't plan to give them another say." Ida's eyes softened. "Good. Levi's got a good heart. He don't waste his time on people who don't carry their weight. You must carry plenty." Naomi watched her go, the mule's hooves muffled in the dampening path. She turned back toward the cabin. Levi had come up from the creek, sleeves wet to the elbow, a bundle of kindling tucked under one arm. "Ida stopped by," Naomi said. "She brought seed potatoes." He stepped up beside her, set the kindling down. "She knows good ground when she sees it." Naomi studied his face. "You told her about us." "I told her you're building something here. That's enough." She touched the edge of the basket with one hand. "I don't want folks thinking this came easy. They won't." He turned toward the garden plot. "But if they do, let them. We'll know the truth." That night, Naomi sat by the fire finishing a patch on Daniel's trousers, while Levi read aloud from a beaten copy of The Prairie Traveler. Daniel lay on his belly drawing horses in charcoal on scrap paper. Daisy had fallen asleep curled beneath a quilt, her doll tucked beneath one arm. Naomi glanced at Levi when he paused in the reading. He was watching her with a look she hadn't seen before, not longing, not pity, something steadier, certain. She set the mending aside. "You never told me what made you settle here." He leaned back in the chair. "I came through these parts 3 years back, looking for work. Ended up helping a widow haul timber through the snow. Lost her husband to pneumonia." She didn't cry once. Naomi kept her gaze on him. "She taught me something," he went on. "That staying put can be braver than leaving." Naomi folded her hands. "I stayed. But I didn't feel brave. You were." She let the truth of that settle. The fire popped softly. Levi leaned forward. "I've been fixing the old barn behind the rise. Thought we could keep a cow, maybe a sow come fall." Naomi tilted her head. "You planning to keep building this life without asking if I want it?" He smiled, faint and honest. "No. I'm asking now." She stood and stepped closer, her voice quiet. "I want a life where my children wake warm. Where I don't have to wonder if someone's going to take what little we have left." "You'll have that," he said. "And more if you'll have me." She reached for his hand, still wrapped from the cut weeks back. The bandage was gone now, the skin healed but marked. "I won't ever be a woman folks write songs about," she said. "I don't want a song," he answered. "I want you." Naomi didn't speak. She didn't need to. She leaned into his chest, her head resting just below his collarbone. And for the first time in years, she let herself be held without fear of what it would cost. Outside, the snowmelt trickled through the creek beds, and the first crocus pushed through the thawed soil. The rains came in late April, slow and steady, soaking deep into the land Levi and Naomi had begun to claim as their own. By then, the first rows of beans had sprouted, their green shoots trembling in the wind, and the children no longer flinched when thunder rolled across the hills. Naomi found herself humming while she worked, low and tuneless, just enough to keep her hands moving through the long hours of mending, planting, and baking. One afternoon, Daisy came in with her skirts soaked to the knees and a fistful of dandelions clutched in her hand. Naomi knelt to take them, brushing mud from the girl's cheek with the edge of her apron. "These are for the table," Daisy whispered, eyes wide and proud. Naomi placed them in a chipped cup by the window. "They're perfect." Daniel had begun carving small animals from bits of scrap wood Levi saved for him. He'd lined them along the shelf above the stove, each piece more careful than the last: a mule deer, a fox with a broken tail, a cow with one eye slightly higher than the other. Naomi didn't say much about them, but each time she passed, she ran a fingertip gently along their backs. That evening, the rain stopped. Levi came in with his coat draped over one arm and his hair damp from the mist. Naomi was stirring a pot of hominy on the stove, and the smell of lard and onions filled the cabin. "You got a letter," he said, handing her a folded sheet of paper. "Came through the post rider from town." Naomi took it slowly, her hands still damp from the wash basin. The handwriting was unfamiliar. She unfolded it by the window where the light lingered, brows drawing together as she read. Levi waited, his hand resting lightly on the back of Daniel's chair. "It's from Myra Tilling," Naomi said after a moment. "She used to live near my father's place. Took in sewing from the stagecoach line." Levi said nothing, letting her speak. "She's moving to Bozeman. Says she heard I was still out here, and if I'm willing, she'd pass along some of her clients. Alterations, mostly. A few ranch wives, maybe a dress or two for the girls working the boarding house." Levi pulled out a chair. "You thinking about taking it?" Naomi folded the letter again, slower this time. "It'd bring in something regular." "Not much, but enough to ease the worry." "You don't need my say-so." "I know," she said. "But I want it." He nodded once. "It's honest work. And you're good at it." She moved to the stove, stirred the pot once, then looked back at him. "I used to tell myself I'd never sew for anyone again. After what happened, after the whispers started, I couldn't bear the thought of folks wearing something stitched by someone they pitied. Levi's voice was low. And now she said, I want to be seen for what I do with my hands, not what folks think they know about me. He stood and crossed to her, not touching, just standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. Then let them wear your work. Let it walk through town, clean and proud. She turned her head, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. The only sound was the soft bubbling of the stew and Daisy's quiet breathing from the corner where she'd fallen asleep with her rag doll tucked beneath her chin. Later that night, after the children had been put to bed and the fire banked low, Levi brought out a small oilskin pouch from beneath the loose board near the hearth. Naomi watched him, curious but quiet. I've been setting this aside, he said, pressing it into her hands. From the cattle drives. Thought I'd use it for lumber, maybe a second mule. She looked down at the pouch, then back up at him. Levi, I can't, you're not taking it, he said gently. You're using it. For thread, bolts of muslin, whatever you need to start sewing again. It's not a gift. It's an investment. Her fingers tightened around the pouch. You trust me that much? I do. Naomi blinked once, then twice. I've never had a man believe in me for what I could build. You've never had the right one, he said. She reached for his hand, not the injured one, the other, and held it between both of hers. When we build that barn up proper, she said, I want a workroom on the end. A window facing east, so I've got light in the mornings. You'll have it. And a shelf for Daniel's carvings. He's proud of them, even if he pretends not to be. Levi's thumb brushed the back of her hand. He's got a good eye. And a bench low enough for Daisy to reach, so she can sit with me while I sew. He nodded. We'll make it that way. Naomi stepped closer, her voice barely above a breath. I think I'm ready to say yes. Levi stilled. To what? To everything, she said. To you. To this. He didn't speak, just leaned in, pressing his forehead lightly to hers, both of them standing in the hush of the cabin, the firelight casting their shadows long and steady across the walls. Outside, the frogs had begun to sing in the shallow pools left by the rain. The land was greening fast, and the road into town would soon be dry enough for a wagon. Naomi knew there would be long days ahead, tired hands and mouths to feed. But there would also be laughter, warmth, and a home that had been chosen not by need, but by love. And she would never again be called unfit by anyone who mattered. By mid-May, Naomi had cleared a space near the back wall of the barn where the light fell cleanest in the morning. Levi had widened the window himself, fitting in glass salvaged from an abandoned way station up the trail. Her sewing table stood there now, level and sturdy, with a foot treadle she'd bartered from the blacksmith's widow in exchange for 3 mended petticoats and a day's help splitting kindling. Daniel had carved her a pincushion shaped like a mule's hoof. She kept it on the table's corner, needles tucked neatly in place. Daisy liked to sit cross-legged on the floor and sort buttons by color, humming tunelessly while Naomi guided the taut muslin under the needle. Levi came in with dirt on his sleeves and a rolled blueprint under one arm. I stopped by the surveyor's, he said, laying the paper across the kitchen table. Had him draw up boundary lines for the land we've been working. It's not much, but it's ours now, properly marked. Naomi set down her cup and leaned over the drawing. You did this without asking. I figured if you didn't like it, I could cancel the filing. But I wanted to give the children something that couldn't be taken. She traced the line that looped along the creek bend, through the cottonwoods, and up to the barn. You think that far ahead? I think about what it means if I don't, he said, folding the paper again. I want their names on something that holds. She looked up at him. And mine. That was the first name I gave him. Naomi didn't speak. She walked to the stove, poured hot water into the basin, and began washing the dishes they'd left from breakfast. After a few moments, she said, when I was 16 and my mother died, I found a note she'd tucked into her sewing tin. Said, what you grow with your hands will feed more than your stomach. I didn't understand it then. Levi dried a plate, setting it on the shelf. Do you now? I think so. Later that evening, she took a walk down the ridge behind the barn, her shawl pulled close and her boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. Levi followed at a short distance, not speaking until she stopped to look out over the pasture where the grass had started rising in thick green waves. I keep waiting for the world to take this away, she said. It won't. It always has before. I'm not going anywhere, he said. And this land, it's not borrowed. We made it. She turned, her face unreadable in the fading light. Do you still want to ask me proper? He didn't hesitate. I do. Naomi reached into her pocket and pulled out a ring of brass shaped from a curtain hook, polished smooth. Daniel made this. Said it might do if you didn't mind it not being gold. I'd rather have something made from this place than anything store-bought. She held it out to him. Then ask. He took her hand, slid the brass gently onto her finger. Naomi Sutton, will you marry me? She slid her arms around his waist and rested her head against his chest. Yes. They married in June beneath the cottonwoods. Ida McKay brought cornbread and a bottle of blackberry wine. Caleb came with a fiddle, and Levi's old trail partner, Harris, rode in from the west with a sack of flour and a hand-forged horseshoe for luck. Daisy wore a wreath of wildflowers, and Daniel stood tall beside Levi, clutching a cowlick that refused to stay down. Naomi wore a dress she'd sewn herself. The fabric was plain, but the stitching was flawless, and when she stepped outside to meet Levi beneath the trees, he looked at her like she was the first and only thing that made sense in the world. After the vows, they ate beneath the open sky. Levi took Naomi's hand and didn't let go once, not even when the wind picked up or the fire burned low. Years passed like that, quiet, steady, and full. Naomi's sewing business grew until she had to teach Daisy to help with the measuring. Daniel took to raising goats and eventually built a second shed with Levi's help. The children laughed more often, slept sounder, and no longer walked with the small, guarded steps of those waiting for something to fall apart. Naomi never went back to Dry Creek. When she rode into town for supplies, she carried herself tall. Folks greeted her with nods and quiet respect, and she gave them only what they'd earned. At night, when the house was still, she'd sit beside Levi on the porch, her head resting against his shoulder, his thumb tracing circles along her knuckles. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. They didn't have to. They'd weathered the worst of life and come out with calloused hands, full hearts, and a patch of good land to call their own, a place no one could take because they'd built it together. And when the snow came again, thick and certain, it found them warm, loved, and whole.